In this video, I'm going to be going over the basics of how we subtract fractions. So the first thing we're going to look at is the most basic example. If I have fractions that I subtract with like denominators. So that would be something like this, where the denominators on the bottom, the numbers on the bottom of the fraction are the same. When this is the case, here's a picture to represent it. If I have eighths and I have 7 of them colored in, now I'm going to take away 2 of them. So I uncolor that one and this one. How many parts are colored in now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It equals 5/8. So when I have a situation like this where the denominators are the same, all I have to do is subtract the numerators. 7 minus 2 is 5, and then I keep the denominator the same. So in the end, my answer is 5/8. Here are 2 example problems to try. You can go ahead and try them now, and when you have the answers figured out, play the video and you can check your answers. These are the answers that you should have gotten, 1/4 and 1 1/4. So in this video, I'm not going to be going over how we simplify fractions like this. So if you got 3/12, good, but then you need to take it to the next step and simplify it. Same thing here, if you got 15/12, great, but then you need to simplify it. So if you are unsure about how to do this, you can check my adding fractions video that I have. In that video, I go into more detail of how we do this, why we do this, and so if you are not sure how I got to 1/4 from 3/12, you can check that video to learn why. Now we're going to be talking about subtracting fractions with unlike denominators. So this would be a situation of, we'll say 7/8 again, but this time minus 1/5. If this is the case, I need to change my denominators so they are the same. So I go, just like how I said earlier, I go into this in more detail in my adding fractions video. So I'm going to go through this step quickly of how I get the same denominators. If you're unsure of why I do it or how I do it, you can watch the adding fractions video to learn more about that. So in this case, I'm going to do 8 times 5 to get the same denominator. So I multiply the 8 times 5, the 5 times 8, and I get 40. So I'm going to be doing some fraction with a 40 in the bottom minus another fraction with 40 in the denominator. So over here in this first fraction, I multiplied the bottom by 5, so I multiply the top by 5. 5 times 7 is 35. In this fraction, I multiplied the bottom by 8, so I will multiply the top by 8. 1 times 8 is 8. Now I have the same denominators, so the only thing I need to do is subtract the numerators. 35 minus 8, and that would get me 27/40. So this is my answer to this problem. I cannot simplify it because I cannot divide 27 and 40 by any common numbers. So that is as simplified as it can be. Here are 2 example problems for you to try. So go ahead and in a second pause the video, solve them, and then you can play the video again to check your answers. Now these are the answers that you should have gotten. After simplifying, the first one should be 1/20, and the second one is 9/68. So if you got either of these wrong, check your work and see exactly where you went wrong and how you could fix your mistake. So now we're going to talk about how to subtract mixed numbers. So an example of this would be 3 5/6 minus 2 3/6. So if you watch my adding mixed numbers section of the adding fractions video, you will notice that this is just the same. When adding and subtracting fractions, I follow the exact same rules, but obviously it depends on if I add or subtract how I solve it in the end. But just like when I add mixed numbers, when I subtract mixed numbers, I always want to change these mixed numbers to improper fractions. If I don't do that, there is a lot more room for mistakes. It's a lot more likely that you'll make a mistake if you try to keep these whole numbers in here than if you just get rid of it by changing it to an improper fraction. So in order to change these mixed numbers to an improper fraction, I'm going to use my trick that I talked about in the adding fractions video. So if you don't know the trick of how we change this mixed number to an improper fraction, you can watch that section of the video to learn more. So I'm going to do 3 times 6 is 18. And then whatever this amount is, I'm going to add 5 to get 23. So 3 and 5/6 is equal to 23/6. Now I'll do the same thing over here on this other fraction. 2 times 6 is 12. Then whatever this amount is, I'm going to add 3 to get 15. So this fraction is equal to 15/6. Now that I have the same denominators, all I have to do is subtract the numerators. So 23 minus 15 is 8/6. I'm going to simplify. I can divide both by 2 to get 4/3. Now I can change this back to a mixed number. How many times does 3 go into 4? 1 whole time, and that's 3. So I'm going to have 1 left over. 1 and 1/3 would be my final answer here. So now here are 2 more problems for you to try. So in a second, pause the video, solve. When you have the answers, play the video again to check them. So go ahead, pause the video now. These are the 2 answers that you should have gotten after changing to improper fractions and solving and simplifying when necessary. 4½ and 2/3. Now we're going to take this the next step further and almost the same thing, but in this situation we would have mixed numbers but with unlike denominators. So something like 7½ minus 5 3/4. If this is the case, I'm going to do everything the exact same how I just did it on the page before, except now I have the extra step of after that finding common denominators so then I can subtract. So for example, I'll change 7½ to an improper fraction. 7 times 2 is 14. I add this amount, I add the 1 to get 15. So this fraction is 15/2. I'll do the same thing on the next one. 5 times 4 is 20. And then I add the 3 to get 23. So 5 3/4 is equal to 23/4. So now I've changed my mixed numbers to improper fractions, but I still cannot subtract because you'll notice my denominators are not the same. 2 and 4, not the same number. So I need to change them so I have common denominators. So once again, I go over this in more detail on my adding fractions video. So I'm going to go through this quickly right now. If you are unsure as to what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, go to that section of the video to learn more about it. So I notice I can do 2 times 2 to get 4. So I can just do times 2 to have a common denominator of 4. So if I do the bottom times 2, then I need to do the top times 2. 15 times 2 is 30. Now over here, I already have the 4, so I just rewrite it, 23 over 4. Now I have my common denominators, so I can subtract. 30 minus 23, 7 over 4. Now how many times does 4 go into 7? 1, with 3 left over. 1 3/4 is my answer. Here are 2 more problems. In a second, pause the video, solve them, and then play the video again to check your answers. So go ahead, do that now. So after solving these 2 problems, these are the 2 answers that you should have gotten. 4 13/24 and 2 8/15. If you did not get one of these or both of these right, go back and check your work and see if you can figure out where you went wrong and fix your mistake. So that is all we're going to do in this video on subtracting fractions. Hopefully after this little bit of practice that you had, you feel a little more comfortable with subtracting fractions.